Hello and welcome back. For those of you that are new to the channel, my name is Ken Vitale. I'm a rehab and sports medicine physician working in orthopedics. I also teach anatomy and physiology at the university here. In this series, I expand upon some concepts that we go over in lecture and introduce some extra learning tips and tricks, some occasional mnemonics, and hopefully some fun. So this week is the respiratory system. This is only a slightly creepy AI generated image that we're going to be using. Let's get going. Okay, so we are going to start off with a mnemonic, the famous Bohr effect, right? The oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. In higher pressures of oxygen over here, such as the lungs, hemoglobin tightly binds oxygen. And then in lower concentrations of O2, which is in the tissue, hemoglobin does not tightly bind that oxygen. It dumps it because that's the whole point. You're supposed to deliver that oxygen to the tissues. You can shift this famous curve to the right in certain situations, and we're going to go right down the list with this mnemonic here. So cadet, face right. C, these are all increases. So in situations of high carbon dioxide, high acidity, which means low pH, DPG, which we're not going to go into in this talk here, but this is a molecule that can go up or down in certain exercise and altitude changes, which is pretty fascinating. Exercise as you start to exercise, or if your temperature goes up, such as having a fever. These are all situations where we need more oxygen. You can shift that curve to the right, and what happens is for the same relative concentration of oxygen previously, the hemoglobin would bind it a little bit higher, but as you shift that curve to the right, now the hemoglobin really dumps that oxygen, gets to the tissues quick, so that is a good thing. It doesn't really work for me. The left loves less, but I guess that's a way to try to remember uh, going the opposite direction. So why do we care about this, right? What is the point of all this? Here's another funky AI generated image. Well, what happens if we're exercising, if we have a fever or sickness, or we're just not getting enough oxygen to our tissues, the curve shifts to the right. In those other situations, carbon dioxide going up, temperature going up, exercise going up, to dump that oxygen and get it to the cells where they need it the most. And this is the whole point, all right? Unloading that oxygen so we can continue to perfuse those tissues with oxygen that require a lot of it. So next we are going to pretend we are a molecule of oxygen, and we are going to trace the anatomical pathway from nose down to alveoli. The anatomical structures are covered for you to test yourself. There is a mnemonic that we're going to go through. It's an okay mnemonic. It's not the best, but here we go. We start out at the nasal cavity, or the nasopharynx. If you are a mouth breather, then we go through the oropharynx. Next, we get obviously to the pharynx and then to the larynx. Down on into the green area, that's the trachea, and then we start to break things down into the individual two main bronchi, the main bronchus left and right, and then into segmental and primary, secondary, tertiary bronchioles, finally down into the alveoli where the actual gas exchange occurs. What is the mnemonic for this? Well, I don't know. Naughty people like tricking bad boys. Always. I guess that works. One thing to remember here, the respiratory system and the conducting system, that's another anatomical difference that some anatomists like to use to help differentiate the two pathways. Now, what goes on at each of these steps, we're going to talk about in the next slide. So here we are. There's a nose. If you believe that's a nose, I guess it works. What happens at the nose? Well, the cilia trap some particles. The air gets warmed and humidified so we don't dry out our lungs. And those hairs in there trap dust and bad guys, little germs and microbes, to hopefully prevent some degree of infection getting into our respiratory system. Pharynx is like the hotel, it's the hostel. It's a shared pathway for both respiratory system and our digestive system. There are different parts. This is what I was talking about before. If you breathe through your nose, nasopharynx, and you breathe through your mouth, the oropharynx, those come together. Some people call this the laryngopharynx, and it's okay, not used as commonly, but nasopharynx and oropharynx you should certainly learn. There are nasogastric tubes and orogastric in terms of putting tubes to get down to the stomach through these different orifices. So far, so good. Pretty straightforward anatomy here. Now, when we get to the larynx, there are a couple more anatomical structures to remember. One important one, as air moves through the larynx, we want that air only to go through across the voice box and down into the lungs. We do not want food going down that pathway. So when you swallow, the epiglottis right here folds over and protects your windpipe from food going down the wrong pipe. There it goes. So learning tip, right? I guess larynx for lyrics. Larynx is your voice box. Trachea moving down, it's not really covered well in this picture here, but has these C-shaped cartilage rings that keep that passageway open so it doesn't collapse, make sure air gets through. That's kind of one of the main identifying features of the trachea, the C-shaped rings. The bronchi also has some degree of rings. Once we get to bronchioles, we no longer have that cartilage. There's a major difference between the right and left main bronchus. The right is shorter, wider, much more vertical, which unfortunately means that is much more prone to aspirating some small item. Unfortunately, this happens with kids and Legos all the time, but it can happen to adults too. And unfortunately, if you are chewing on something and you inhale it quite literally, well, it can lodge, and it typically lodges in the right main, not the left. Scary things do happen, yes. And then it breaks down into primary, secondary, and tertiary, which is the next slide right here, getting down into the terminal bronchioles here. Once we get to the level of bronchioles, no more cartilage keeping those pathways patent. But now the main anatomical feature is smooth muscle, and that's where there's a lot of constriction and dilation. This is where, if you have asthma or you take asthma medication, this is where the main parts of dilation and constriction can occur in the bronchiole stage. I guess you could use this. Bronchioles are branching, right? The branching rows that lead to the alveoli. That's sort of a stretch for a learning tip for mnemonic, but try in here. Down to alveolar ducts and the alveoli, that's where the actual gas exchange occurs. That's where all the action is. There is an incredible amount of surface area at these very tiny alveolar sacs here that you can spread, and it'll go pretty darn far. Your lungs are packed with alveoli and a lot of surface area for that very important gas exchange. Obviously, oxygen comes in and carbon dioxide goes out. Now, on to some fun facts. You've probably heard these here and there. Good, fun anatomical trivia to your friends. How fast can a cough travel? Well, 50 miles an hour and can go 6 feet. This is where the whole COVID and 6 feet distance came about. When you do studies and someone coughs, yes, it can spew 6 feet out in front of you. So, bring an umbrella or something when someone is coughing up a lung next to you. How about a sneeze? Well, guess what? That's going to be even faster. And gets fairly disgusting too. 100 miles an hour your sneeze can go, and 100,000 tiny little droplets into the air. So next time you just sneeze with your hands away from you, you are spreading yourself in the local environment. So please cover your mouth when you sneeze. Yes, this is pretty disgusting when you take some still frames of it, but fascinating nonetheless. Okay, and to wrap up the anatomy, fun facts about alveoli. Yeah, we got a ton of them, 300 million alveoli, which is an incredible amount of surface area. Like I was talking about before, if you do a little 3D rendering of it, incredible surface area. And if you were to spread that out on a flat surface, you would literally get half a tennis court. And yes, beware. Dry humor and puns abound in anatomy, and I am an absolute fan of it. You know that if you've taken my class. Spread your lungs on a tennis court. Yeah, you're going to die. Okay, on to hiccups. This is a really neat one, still not fully known. It's the diaphragm contracting, but we do not exactly know or can pinpoint the evolutionary purpose. There are three prevailing theories out there. One, it stems from vestigial or primary or ancient forms of humans when we were likely more aquatic, and the hiccup actually was somewhat of a mechanism to regulate the amount of water passing through our version of gills. So that's kind of a neat idea. A lot of biologists and anthropologists like that idea. Mammals do have some form of a hiccup mechanism. Unfortunately, if you've ever seen your dog eat, they often inhale that food and eat it very quickly, they are literally swallowing little bits of air, and then sometimes the dog hiccups, sometimes the dog burps. This could be something remnant from our early mammalian forms. So that's the second theory. The third one, the most interesting one to me, is that it's practice. When we are in the fetal stage, there is no air there in the womb, and this is some form of an early a form of trying to practice that oxygen carbon dioxide exchange. Good practice, I think. Another little fun fact, does anyone know how long the Guinness World Record? Now things change, so at the time of recording of this video, it's over 24 minutes in a legit Guinness World Record attempt. These are free divers. They do what's called oxygen prep. They breathe 100% oxygen to kind of load up the oxygen in their blood. Yeah, it's a little bit of cheating, so to speak, but heck, if you can hold your breath 24 minutes and dive into the water, that is, take all the oxygen you need. That is pretty amazing. This is the guy that has done it, and can you imagine 24 minutes? That is probably double this video, holding your breath the whole time. That's ridiculous. Okay, and wrapping up the fun facts here, since this is discussed all the time, I still hear it everywhere I go. Related to the respiratory system and oxygenation of your blood, is it truly blue when your blood is deoxygenated? Because heck, when you look at your veins, that looks blue, so your blood is actually blue, right? Well, no, that does not exist. When you look at your veins, and you probably are looking at them right now, and they do appear somewhat bluish when you do anatomy and dissection in the cadaver lab, the veins are never blue. If they have been injected with dye, some locations do that, or some animal dissections inject the arterial system red and the venous system blue to help you identify those structures, that may influence your perception, but the veins are more neutral, colored. There is no blue or red to them. In terms of why they appear blue, this is the same thing as the sun. When the sun is directly overhead versus at sunset at a 90-degree angle away from you, in terms of the red versus blue light, there's more scattering that happens when you're in a sunset position, so the sun appears very red, whereas directly overhead there is less blue scattered, so it has a different color. And if you want to test that yourself, you can kind of look at your veins straight on versus bringing your arm almost like the sunset, and you're looking at your veins more at 90 degrees. They do indeed, at least to me, appear less blue than if I'm looking at them straight on. And some people don't really even want to pay attention to physics or don't want to believe that, but this makes it much more blunt and obvious. If you've ever had your blood drawn, some people say, well, when it's in the veins, it's blue, and as soon as you get a cut and the blood comes out to the surface, it gets oxygenated from the atmosphere, so that's why it turns red. So there's a lot of ways people try to, they just want to believe that it's blue, but it is not. Because when you get blood drawn, these vials that are vacuum sealed don't have any air in them. If you donate blood, these same blood donation bags are absolutely vacuum sealed. They never touch air. You don't want to get any exposure to air. And when you draw your blood here, or if you donate blood, it's not blue. Yeah, it's dark red, yes, a lower oxygenation count to venous blood. And if you've ever had an arterial blood gas drawn, it is much brighter red compared to venous, but it is not blue. So that takes care of that. Next, on to yawning. Now, it's not just about being tired. The neat thing about yawning, yes, this has been looked at and studied, is it may actually help cool down the brain, believe it or not. A lot of people have heard the increased oxygenation level because you take a huge deep breath when we're maybe bored or sleepy. But if you think about it, when you open your mouth wide to yawn, which I'm not going to do here because that would be kind of rude looking, cool air enters your mouth and just cools down the oropharynx and nasopharynx. The tissues cool, the arterioles and capillaries and veins that are in that area get relatively cooled as well, which then flows up and down through your brain, and your brain cools down with yawning. That is kind of neat, right? Your jaw stretches, also helping to pumping action in terms of like your muscle pumping, your jaw pumping can push out some warmer blood and allow potentially cooler blood to circulate in. and may get a little localized cooling effect for your noggin, which is kind of neat. But this actually does pan out in studies. People yawn less in colder environments and more in warmer environments. That's a pretty neat study. I don't know who did that, but that's kind of cool. Now, how about this? Have any of you heard of yawn contagion? Yes, it is potentially contagious, and there are theories about this. One is social mirroring. It seems to be a form of social mirroring in animals. So if you see someone yawn, perhaps you start yawning yourself. Another theory is that it is a form of empathy. People who are more empathetic, apparently in studies, are more likely to have yawn contagion than people with, well, the quote unquote psychopath traits, which apparently are less likely. I don't know how they did that study. I don't know how they determined someone had psychopathic traits and did this study, but it's out there. I'm putting yawning pictures in case anyone starts yawning while they are watching this video, then you have yawn contagion. Third one, temperature regulation. If you're in the same area, the same climate, maybe that can help cool down your brain, and maybe you have a higher chance of survival if you do have this. So it's kind of the when in Rome model here. So very interesting things. And if you've ever seen this, if you have a dog or you are around dogs that yawn, it does, there's a cross-species version of this. Yes, it can happen if you are yawning, and I'm about to right now. Uh, yeah, it is a form of social bonding. I have a dog. When my dog yawns, yeah, happens to me too. What if you're like me and you got that yawn coming on and you're trying to hide it or stop it, or you're in the middle of lecturing and it's uh, hard to do it? One way, it's not clenching your teeth and trying to talk through the yawn, because you'll still end up yawning. You'll just kind of have that funny face as you're talking and trying to yawn to prevent your jaw from opening. Doesn't work. But nasal breathing does. Vertebral venous plexus, which is in the brainstem, gets cooled in addition to that nasal cooling pathways of all the other areas when we cool our brains. That apparently focally cools down the brainstem and may stop the yawn. Forehead cooling. This is not something that's common, but they just tested it. So if you slap a cold thing on your forehead, you apparently can stop a yawn. So kind of fun. All right, second to last slide here. Anyone ever thought about this? Can you smell while you're sleeping? Has anyone ever tested this out? Well, apparently your brainstem tends to shut off a lot of these pathways here, so you don't detect odors, excuse me, as easily as if you were awake. But if you're in a light sleep, yes, you can. I've tested that with my dog. If she is in a dead sleep, she doesn't smell food or a treat. But if she's just kind of lightly sleeping and you slip something right under the nose, wakes up and just chomps it immediately. How about another thing, breathing and posture? Does anyone know these fun facts? This is kind of intuitive, but if we have bad posture, we are compressing. It's very hard to take a deep breath when we have bad kyphotic thoracic posture, which is, again, the importance of having a healthy posture. You'll oxygenate yourself a lot better. And one final potentially creepy things, if you take your lungs and place them in water, yes, they would float because it is air filled, and that's a cadaver sample of a lung, and yes, does indeed float. And yeah, if you take your lungs out of your body and place them in water, yeah, you know what's going to happen. That joke had to come back somehow. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you have some mnemonics, please let me know in the comments. I love to share it with my students. I'm sure you can come up with better ones than mine, and see you in the next video.